Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are on a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to ARN. And of course, we couldn't do it without the inventor of the spine buster, the enforcer himself, the Hall of Famer, Double A, Arn Anderson. Arn, how are you, man?
I'm great. Well, you can go ahead and include pretty quickly the guy that's got his second vaccination as well. The Lundys. Brock and I will be getting our second shot the 11th, which is tomorrow, as soon as we land. And the whole family will be vaccinated fully. So I feel really good about that.
That's awesome, man. Are y'all getting Pfizer or Moderna?
We got Pfizer, and none of us have had any side effects whatsoever. Nothing. And for the peace of mind, man, it's going to feel good to have a little bit of freedom. And that opens up a lot of more of the world for you. Once you have that second shot, you have no issues. And nobody I've heard has had any issues, so it gets my vote. I think it's a choice for everybody, an individual choice on whether they have it or not. For our family, we just feel safer and no issues.
Well, there's no issue with the format change here on the show either. We're a couple deep now at this point, as you and I are talking, and we've gotten unanimous praise on the format shuffle. Taking it back to the very beginning, all I've seen is really, really positive stuff online. And of course, people are loving that we're back on Saturdays at 6:05, sort of your second home away from home. What's the feedback you've seen so far, Arn?
Same thing. I guess a lot of people share a lot of things in life. And that was my reason for wanting to start over and tell the story for what it really is. I wasn't looking for that to be a finger pointing exercise or to blame anybody or to have any negative connotations to it. It wasn't about the damage that I got not having a mother and father. It was about the positive of having great grandparents. That was the issue I wanted to get out there, and the people I wanted to praise, because I think they're the unsung heroes of probably, our country, if not the world. Thank God for grandparents or adoptive parents or just people that give a shit and do outstanding things where children are concerned. That was the meaning of the story, and I think it resonated with a lot of people, apparently.
I would totally agree. So much so that we're calling it an audible today. And rather than do an Ask Arn Anything, we're going to keep the story going. You guys asked for it, and we're going to deliver. Yes, Ask Arn will return, but we just felt it was important to just keep mashing the gas today. So let's pick up where we left off. You've decided to sort of relocate over to Bill Watt's territory. You're going to be bunking up with Mr. Horner, and your old pal Pee Wee's going to sleep on the couch. You and Tim are going to split the bills here, and you're off to the races, working in your first territory for what you probably imagine is going to be a real stretch. You've had, some brief appearances on Georgia TV. And of course you spent a couple of weeks down in Pensacola, but what felt like an opportunity is now going to be a little bit of a run. Let's pick up with the next match I can see, which is Jesse Barr defeating Marty Lunde at the Riverside Centralplex in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, October 26, 1982. Jesse Barr, we know, is going to go on to be Jimmy Jack Funk in the World Wrestling Federation just a few years after this. Any memories of working with Jesse?
Yeah, I sure do. That would have probably been my one of my first house shows with Watts. And, you know, you asked me one time if I'd ever gotten potatoed or banged around in the ring. You know, I think Jesse, I must have been either hard to move around or a little snug or something with Jesse or he just missed and it was just a potato. But I got split a little bit that night. I think it was over the eye or split lip or something. Nothing major. You know, I just figured that was all part of it.
Right.
But that's what I remember for the match, and that he was a lot more experienced than I was. And, you know, so he kind of led me through the thing, but I just remember getting whacked a little bit and thinking, wow, okay, that was all right. I got no problem selling that. And that's really all I remember about it. But he was a pretty accomplished hand at that time. Somewhere down the road, I heard a story about him running into Ming that went south pretty quickly. But that would have happened with any of us. So
the very next day, you have a 3-minute and 27-second match on TV at the Irish McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport, Louisiana. This is October 27th, 1982, and you're on the B side to Mr. Wrestling number 2. Mr. Wrestling number 2, for some of our younger listeners, they may not know, he was considered like wrestling royalty here, right? This is probably one of the bigger names in the business you'd wrestled at this point. What was that like?
Oh, it was as you can imagine, I was starstruck. You know, as I got to know him, and it was not there, but I ran into him a couple of times. Prior to that, when I was doing, you know, TV matches in Atlanta and stuff, I would see Wrestling 2 sitting in the locker room. And I don't mean this to be a negative towards him. It's just comical. And how he could have not saw it as comical either, I don't know. But first time I saw him was in Atlanta, and I went down with Ted Allen to just do jobs on TV. And I look over, and there is Wrestling 2 sitting there in his tights and his mask. His glasses are on the outside of his mask, and he's smoking one of those big, curvy Inspector Clouseau pipes, reading a book. You got that visual in your head?
I do.
And I think I just busted out laughing. I don't remember, but I think I had to run around the corner. It was the damnedest thing I ever saw. But guys in those days, they didn't take off their masks in the locker room. Most of them, not the ones in the States. But I got to know him a little bit later on, not during this time with Watts, because I was just there doing jobs. Actually, when I was in Pensacola, he came in for some shots, and Randy Rose and his girl took Aaron and I and Wrestling 2 and his wife out on this boat down in Pensacola. So we had a couple of days of boating down there. But backing up to the Watts, you know, I was just a guy that had just a handful of matches, and here's Wrestling 2 in the ring. I wasn't really prepared for that knee lift, because what it turned out to be is, other than a knee in the chest, which I thought was smacking, it was him smacking you in the back.
Yeah.
And man, did it sting. So I'm sure the sale on that was probably a little goofy, a little wonky.
So the idea is, I think it was called the $1 Million Knee Lift. Is that right?
It was to me.
The idea is that's his finishing maneuver. And, you know, I guess we would see years later in the UFC, like a Muay Thai strike, you know, some sort of knee from the clinch or whatever. But this is before fans are familiar with all that here in America. So it's just a quote unquote regular knee lift. So you'd be bent over. He's coming at you. Bam, here comes the knee. But it would get this fantastic sound. And of course, these days, leg slapping is a pretty controversial thing for a super kick, but he's not going to slap his leg. He slaps the shit out of your back. That's where the noise comes from, right?
Yes, sir. And it was sounded off, it cracked, and his timing, you're watching the knee, you're not watching the slap on the back. And that was some more of the magic of what we did.
Yeah.
It was like everything else that is a lost art. He never let it out. If you didn't just know from knowing, you would never know that crack didn't come from him kneeing you in the head or kneeing you in the face.
You know, I know I'm being silly here, but I don't want to ask the obvious. Does he tell you ahead of time, hey kid, here's the way the finish works? Or do you just feel it and know, okay, I got to figure this out now?
I think the referee came over. He said, you know, wrestling 2 uses that big knee. You know, you're okay with that? I said, yes, sir. I'm fine with that. And they just take it at point blank. That means you know what you're doing.
I got you.
And he just, you know, he kicked me in the guts or something. Or I think he hit me. No, I'll tell you what it was. I think he hit me. We'll have to look at the tape, but I think he hit me with a backdrop or something. And as I was selling up, he was winding up and setting up, and that was your drama. And the fans always got behind it. So as you turned into him, there was a big knee. Boom.
I get it. It's a wrestling podcast, but he's saving us money on our mortgage. Do you really trust this process? The reviews don't lie. 5-star review after 5-star review. We make it fast, we make it easy, and it's no cost or obligation. Give us a shot to earn your business. I'm telling you, you'll be glad you did, especially if you like keeping more of your own money. You don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket, so what are you waiting for? Hurry to savewithconrad.com.
I know you mentioned a minute ago something about Aaron. I just want to add context. That's in the future. At this point, you have not yet met Aaron, right?
No, absolutely not. I skipped ahead a little bit, and we'll get there eventually, but I didn't get to know two at all. They were in separate locker rooms. I had the match with him. We moved on. I think that was probably the only time I worked with him.
Let's talk about November 10th, 1982. You work a match on TV again in Shreveport. Tony Atlas gets the win that day. Well, this have been your first time working with Tony. What was it like meeting Tony?
Yes, sir. And Tony's is a sweetheart of a guy. You know, to this day, he's never changed. You know, very personable. You know, he's first one to, hey, how you doing when you see him at a signing or something. Back then, he was jacked.
Yeah.
I mean, jacked and strong. He wasn't a guy that just had beach muscles. I mean, this guy was heavy, I think plus 500-pound bench presser.
Wow.
He had no problem pressing me, that's for sure. Very impressive guy, nice enough guy. But yeah, that was the first time I would have met Tony.
Let's talk about another person you're in the ring with on the 11th of yeah, I guess it's the same day. You're doing double duty here on the TV show. Yeah,
you betcha.
So you're going to be teaming with grappler number 2. Now that name may not ring a bell to a lot of folks, but the reality is it's Dirty White Boy, the future TL Hopper, Tony Anthony. Talk to us a little bit about the Dirty White Boy way back when.
Well, he was, ironically, Tony Anthony was leaving that week to go be with Lynn Denton, who was grappler number 1.
Right.
Very accomplished hand, both of those guys. They were going to Dallas, which allowed me to get the extra bedroom in Tim Horner's apartment. So again, we're back to that timing is everything. You know, it really is for everything in this business. And Tony was just a regular guy, man. He wasn't a real big guy. He didn't have a big body, but he was one of those guys that you wanted to have on your crew, him and Lynn Denton, because hell, they could wrestle. They were a good team. They were good individually. They knew how to go out and have a match and lead a guy through a match. I guess Tony would have probably been a year or two ahead of me as far as how long he had been in the business. And he was very good friends with Tim, which meant he was a good guy because Tim Horner has always been a really good guy to me.
We know Tony Anthony's going to have big success in the territory days. Of course, Dirty White Boy is going to become a big star for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And we briefly see him work as an enhancement talent over on the WWF side of things. T.L. Hopper was his regrettable plumber gimmick. Why don't you think he ever made it on a bigger stage? It feels like everybody who ever worked with him, anytime I ever hear his name, people have nothing but high praise. Is it just simply a matter of timing, do you think?
Cosmetics. That era, it was starting to evolve into, it's always been about big guys, especially with like WWF. Vince loved big, tall, big guys, big, rugged guys, good bodies, the whole thing. And the business had started to morph that way a little bit. Tony was just an average guy. If he walked in the room, if he was walking around the grocery store, pushing a cart, you would never think twice unless you were just an avid wrestling fan if you saw him. But man, his value, and people like him, people like Tim Horner, Brad Armstrong, your seasoned guys that can go out and just have a hell of a match with anybody. That's what he was, and that's where his value was. And you put him with Lynn Denton. They went into Dallas, and I think they had a really, really good run there.
Yeah, it is interesting you mentioned that. I think Tony Anthony was only like 5'10". And to your point, he wasn't this jacked up dude, but I can't help but think about guys that had his sort of skill set and profile. Was he born like 10 years too late? Because if he'd have come around the business in the 70s instead of the 80s, you got to think he would have had much more opportunity. There wasn't the expectation that you look like a superhero in the 70s, right?
It was more about work rate because there weren't a lot of great bodies. I mean, There were some pretty big guys, but I mean, weight training and steroids and all those things that made you look a lot better.
Yeah.
Hadn't came along yet, and it wasn't mainstream in the business. I think if Tony would have been even 5 years ahead, he would have had a much better run because he was very, very talented. He really was.
On November 13th, you find yourself teaming with Grappler number 2 to take on Ted Allen, your old pal, and Kelly Kaniski. I wanted to talk a little bit about Kelly Kaniski because this is a name we don't hear very often coming out of the Calgary territory. Any memory of working with Kelly?
I remember Kelly was pigeon-toed. Not that mattered, but it just, for some reason, that's what I remember about him. I remember that his dad was a big star in the business, Gene Kaniski, which meant that Kelly had a tough road to hold, I imagine, following in his dad's footsteps. His dad, I think, had like a flat top. I mean, he had that real bulldogish, if I'm remembering, the picture that I've seen of him. He had that real rough look. He looked like a drill sergeant or something and was just a big, rugged guy. So I just remember Kelly talking about his dad very fondly and, growing up a little bit, just a little bit of stuff that if I was in the room with him and I overheard a conversation, but nice enough fella. He would have been kind of like me at the time, just a middle of the road as far as his look. He wasn't he was a good sized guy, but not an overly great body or anything like that. Nothing that would make him really stand out.
He briefly worked for Mid-Atlantic, World Class, the AWA, but he retires by 87. I think at the time he retired, he's only like 27 years old. Well, why do you think that is? Did he just not have the love for wrestling the way some other guys do? Or was he just frustrated with his lack of traction in the business based on the big shoes maybe his dad had left behind?
Yeah, I think so. And the fact that he hadn't been used better. When you've been to that many territories and you never make it past that underneath opening match, second match of the night, maybe third match of the night situation, you figure out it's a hard business. It can either be the easiest, most wonderful business in the world, greatest way to make a living in the world, or it can be the most difficult. It's almost like a salesman. You probably heard this in your line of work. Being a salesman is either the easiest, best paying job you've ever had, are the hardest low paying job, depending on if you excel or not.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and we're selling ourselves. We are the product. And if you don't get over in your third or fourth territory and you're kind of just breaking even, because if you have a family, you're having to send money home and live as cheaply as you can. But pounding those roads in Louisiana in the first match for $500 a week, I can tell you, had it not been for me just loving the business and willing to sleep in my car or doing whatever I had to do, eat beanie weenies out of a can to get a chance of being a wrestler, I could see where it would be very, very difficult if moving from territory to territory, that was your life as an underneath. I had no aspirations of being an underneath guy. I wanted to be the best wrestler ever. That was my goal, not to be the world champion, not to be the champion of any particular territory. I just wanted to be really, really good. And I figured everything else would take care of itself.
Well, words to live by right there. Let's talk about your next challenge, though, because this is probably a first. November 14th, 1982, you find yourself taking on Ted Allen, but it's in a mixed tag. He's got Princess Victoria in his corner. You've got Leilani Kai in yours. You're at the Parish Coliseum in Alexandria, Louisiana for an afternoon show. Tell me about your first, I assume this is your first mixed tag?
Yes, sir. And thank God it was one of those deals where the girls didn't beat on the guys and the guys didn't beat on the girls.
Right.
It was guys got in wrestled. If one of the guys tagged out, the other girl had to get in. It was one of those things. I have never been and will never be comfortable with guys hitting girls in our business. It just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's just all the things we as a nation are against, abuse of women. I didn't like it back then, but it wasn't involved in this match.
Tell me what you remember about Princess Victoria, Leilani Kai, or just women's wrestling at the time. I think a lot of us remember seeing wrestling posters as a kid, and it would say, it would run through all the different stars who were on the show. And then at the very bottom, it would say something like +2 midget matches and the girls or something like that. It was almost like a throwaway. Outback's going to promote, the new surf and turf. Oh yeah, we got mashed potatoes too. I mean, that's the way the ladies and the little folks were positioned in wrestling at the time, right?
100%. And what an injustice. The reality that I learned, because Bill did use some of the little folks, and he used only one girls match, and it would come in, they would make the loop, and it was probably, other than being a 5-month deal, it was probably be like a 2-week to 3-week run. But Leilani Kai was a really sweetheart, and she was one of the veterans, and Princess Victoria was for that time one of the more recognized baby faces. So, I'm sure they had worked together around the world, if not the country, many times. They seemed very polished. It was actually, fun because I was learning and getting to wrestle Ted. At that point, I think I'd learned enough. Granted, I hadn't had that many matches yet, but I'd made an improvement, because after the match was over, it was a situation where we were in similar areas dressing, to where he came over and he says, "Man, you're already starting to pick it up. I'm proud of you." And coming from him, who was an accomplished worker. Yeah. Ted Allen was, as good as anybody sitting in the locker room. He was really polished. Man, it made my day. And, it was one of those things that just, hey, he was my first mentor. And for him to say, "I'm starting to pick it up," he must be telling the truth. So it's great for my confidence.
The next big match you're going to have is not on TV, but I know that it had to be a big deal to you. You're going to be taking on Chavo Guerrero on November 21st, 1982. Chavo Guerrero is wrestling royalty. the original Mr. Mexico. What can you tell us about your match here with Chavo?
Chavo Classic. He was, I remember he had came over and I forget where he was bouncing back and forth to, maybe San Antonio territory from Watts, or could have been the other, Dallas, could have been the Von Erichs, but he was like in and out. And I knew that, the Guerrero name, obviously I knew my history, but mostly from that area of the country. And again, he was so good. And all the things that he was capable of doing, I probably was not capable of being on the other side and reciprocating and catching them and being in the right spot, because I was just too green. So he had to kind of dumb his work down a little bit to work with me, which, in those days, that's what you did, because there was no way to fix it. You didn't want to take a guy that was very green and try to do too much, because you ended up making both of you look silly.
Yeah.
But it was, I worked with him just a few times, and I hope I did enough to please him. And I think the audience was okay with it. But yeah, it was not lost on me that he was wrestling royalty.
Talk to me a little bit about the different styles that you're running up against. These days, when you go to the WWE, everybody goes, well, not everybody, most people go through NXT, and you're going to sort of learn the WWE way, if that makes sense. But back in this era, man, just look at who all we've talked about so far. You've wrestled people from all over the country and often the world. So everybody sort of has their own style and idiosyncrasies. And it's not like these days where, man, I wonder what he does. Let's just pull up YouTube. You really got your information on these guys from magazines, but looking at still pictures and reading what Bill Apter or George Napolitano or seeing their pictures, that's one thing. It's another thing to actually see what they do. And so for a lot of these guys, this is probably the first time you've ever, quote unquote, seen them wrestle is when you're between the ropes with them, right?
Yeah. And what I figured out pretty quickly is if I was in the first match pretty much the entire 5 to 6 months that I was there.
Right.
Pretty much either the first match, second match, at the very latest, the third match of the night. I would go find myself a place behind the curtain where nobody could see me, and I would study everybody and watch what everybody did. And I took notes and wrote down what everybody did, their moves and all that stuff, so that if I had the opportunity to see them or work with them later, I at least had some stuff wrote down that they did, because it was up to heels in those days. Conrad, even if you were an underneath heel, it was up to you to call the match.
Right.
If you had a guy that was more polished than you and he wasn't interested in you calling anything, he would just say something like, you'd lock up and he'd just say, just go with me, kid. Just go with it, kid. And you knew he was going to lead the match from the babyface side. But if you weren't green, if you were a seasoned heel and you had some experience, it's up to you to lead the match, and you need to call the stuff that featured the babyface. Obviously, Bill Watts had a strict set of rules for underneath matches, which was the first or second match, at least the first match of the night. Usually a 20-minute Broadway, no punching, no kicking, no eye gouging, and keep it in the ring. So you learned how to work. You learned how to wrestle. You learned how to work off a headlock or a hammer lock or a leg or whatever it may be. You learned in his territory because you couldn't do any of the other stuff. So it was up to you to get your thinking cap on and get your learning curve and start watching everything that everybody did. But so you knew when you got to the ring, you knew what to call.
I want to get to the end of November before I start asking some questions that are not about matches, but we've got some other interesting opponents I want to run through. Riverside Centralplex in Baton Rouge, November 22nd. So we're near Thanksgiving at this point. You're going to be taking on Mike Sharp. Mike Sharp is a guy that a lot of us first saw on WWF TV as an enhancement talent. And Bruce Pritchard said the dude was a clean freak. He would take a 2-hour shower. I mean, he had some OCD about him, I guess, back in the day. What do you remember about Iron Mike Sharp?
He was a different cat. Those showers are legendary. Now, I worked with Mike a few times. He was a big, solid, great look, big, rugged heel. He really was. He could be, and this has happened, I'm going to go on record as saying many times, he has been in the first match, and when the main event finished and those guys were getting in the shower, Mike was still in the shower. Now, I wouldn't say that he just came out of the ring after the first match and took off and ran and jumped in the shower, but let's just say he got in there at intermission.
Right.
And he was still there. Now, if you were riding with him, because he was not going to break his routine for anybody. If you were riding with him in his car, you know, in those days, you were allowed to leave when your match was over. I chose not to because I wanted to stay and study everybody. But if you were one of those veterans that just happened to be making the towns with Mike and he was first match and you were second match, you would have the opportunity to get out of there for 7:30 start. You could be on the road probably by 8:30,
right,
and have a hell of a jump on getting some, you know, a couple more hours sleep. And when you work for Bill Watts in that territory, driving 3,000 miles a week, sometimes 2 hours sleep is a big deal. Two extra hours. But he was a really a nice man. He was a gentleman, big rugged worker. I've heard stories about security going through a building after the shows and with like a German Shepherd that they were, you know, making sure the building was empty or something. The German Shepherd making a run at Mike, who was still in the shower. But he's been locked in buildings because people didn't check closely enough to see that one guy was still there. The main event had already left. Everyone had left. There's Mike still showering. Really nice man. Let's just say a little quirky.
Fair to say. We're marching towards Thanksgiving. But before we get there, we're going to wrestle Tim Horner in Little Rock, Arkansas. And then the next day, we're back in Shreveport for TV. And now we're taking on Stagger Lee. Now, this is not the WCW person you remember, Stagger Lee Marshall. This is, in fact, a masked man who physically resembles Junkyard Dog. But this is, of course, a big storyline payoff. It's JYD under a hood. And JYD has been cemented as, if not the one of the top baby faces, one of the most over talents that ever worked with Bill Watts. And you worked with JYD years later in WCW when perhaps he wasn't at his peak run or peak physical condition. But man, JYD in this era, in front of these fans, it was something to see, was it not?
I will go on record and say for that area, that point in time, he was as over as Hogan, Gold, Flair, Rock, Austin. For Louisiana and that territory, Little Rock, Arkansas, Oklahoma, man, he was red hot. And his ring music was Another One Bites the Dust, which they were allowed to, which that music, if you're riding down the road, if you're not even heard of the wrestling business and that song comes on the radio and you cut it up, you're wanting to jump through the roof.
Yeah.
It's just one of those iconic songs. Well, buddy, when it hit and he came through that curtain swinging that chain, that dog chain, man, I never saw anything like it. I had to sit down. Cold chills were running up my spine. I'd never witnessed anything like that. But I also looked at it and I went, man, this is exactly what I signed up for. How do I get in the ring with him? And he had done the angle, and he had on the hood. He had apparently had to leave. He had lost a lose or leave town or something, got a screw job. I think we're probably DiBiase at the time, or some of those guys, the Rat Pack. So he's wearing a hood, and man, it was over. I was, again, starstruck to be in the ring with him.
Yeah, it was a DiBiase feud in '82, and they were, former tag team partners. But of course, DiBiase turns heel and then wins the loser leaves town match. But he used a loaded glove, so he cheated to do it. So he's still hanging around for revenge as Stagger Lee. You mentioned the music. There's been a lot of discussion over the years of who really deserves the credit for popularizing entrance themes and music and tying it into wrestling. And, there was famous videos put together in World Class and in Memphis where I guess it was a little different presentation, but Michael Hayes would sometimes say, "Oh no, we were the first to do it with the Freebirds, and we came to the ring to, of course, the Leonard Skinner song." And then, as you mentioned, another one bites the dust here for JYD, another really popular one. About 82 here, was everyone using entrance music, or was it reserved for special talent?
It was reserved for special talent. And the fact that only a few people had music made it even more special.
That's right.
It wasn't, overdone. And I don't know how they pulled it off, if they were having to pay residuals to the artists.
They didn't pay anybody. You know that.
Oh, well, I was trying to be polite. Not get anybody sued. But I mean, these were popular songs. I remember Jerry Stubbs as Mr. Olympia. His ring music was Let It Whip. Another great song, man. It pulled you out of your chair.
Yeah.
How could you not feel good about that? But I think it was more for top baby faces. Heels really didn't need music unless there was a situation where they had been a baby face. Top baby face had their ring music, and now they were switched heel and they were just shoving it up everybody's keister by still playing the music. Would be the only reason I could think of to do it. Wasn't a positive thing.
Listen, there have been a lot of over talents that you had worked with. We talked about you wrestling DiBiase before, and of course you worked with Mr. Wrestling too, and you worked, in his territory against Bob Armstrong. Boy, he could have been the freaking mayor. But JYD here, Stagger Lee, is this the biggest pop you'd ever seen in wrestling at that point?
Oh yeah. I needed to sit down again. It was one of those deals. I just can't explain it. If you very firmly know they're not screaming for you or at you, or it's not about you, it's about your opponent, you still get to get swept up in it because you're out there in the middle of it. And everything that you do once the match starts and he is mowing you down, they're popping for him, but they're also popping for you because you're playing a role, you're playing a part of it, and you're the stunt man for the big star, and you get to experience it even though it's not about you at all. It's still, that's the one thing that money can't give you, drugs can't give you, alcohol can't give you. What those fans give you when they react to everything that you do with your maestro stick, when you got your maestro stick out and you're leading that audience and having them react the way you want to, it is the biggest feeling of power. It's the only word I could come up with that I can think of. There's nothing like it. It's magic.
That same day, I want to mention you're working against, again, it's a TV day. So you got two matches. You're going to work again with Mr. Wrestling number 2. This is now your second time having a match with him. Is the second verse the same as the first, or do you remember that one being a little smoother?
I think he probably trusted me more. I don't think my share of the match would have probably been any different. It wouldn't have made any difference at all. My job was to get in there and get him over. But in those days, like you said earlier, you don't know guys. Sometimes when you get in the ring, it's the first time you've ever met a guy or even spoke to a guy. And a lot of times you lock up and go, How you doing? Give them your name. Let's have some fun. And when you were a pretty big guy and you were a pretty strong guy in those days, the veterans that have been around for a while, they would try to relax you in the ring because they didn't know what you had. You look across the ring and here, there were some big, strong guys that just happened to be underneath guys and weren't positioned on the wrestling card that were some badasses, and you didn't know who those guys were. So the veterans would lock up. How you doing, kid? It's going to be fun. Just hang on. And it would relax you. And whatever you said, which should have been nothing, 2 words. Yes, sir. That was your reaction every time. Same answer. And you just follow. It made those guys more relaxed. Because, when a guy picks you up, he can drop you flat. He can drop you hard. He can drop you textbook. He can also drop you on your head. And once you're up there, ain't nothing you can do about it.
Listen, there's a lot of us wrestling fans listening to this, so we wouldn't know the answer to this. So it probably feels a little elementary for us to even ask. And I'm speaking for all of us here. In this era where there are so many different talents from all over the world working together, as you said, sometimes you would introduce yourself in the lockup. And as a reminder, that's happening because heels are in one locker room, baby faces are in another. So it's not like you could have just walked over and talked to the guy. We're still trying to quote unquote keep kayfabe here. But when you're in the course of a match, is there a sequence of moves that could be called, a series of quote unquote spots that was just considered like standard fare? Like, everybody does this. So if he said a certain phrase or series of words, that was universal. Everybody did a series of moves in that combination. Can you take us through what some of those combinations could have been?
Well, yeah, for that day, it was like when whoever would train you, hopefully in those days, Ted Allen trained me, and first thing he taught you was footwork, circling the ring. Next thing was lock up, nice and solid. Keep your head up, keep your eyes forward, a nice solid lock up. First thing you learned was grab a headlock and how to snatch a headlock and how to get there and make it look viable and believable and credible. Then it went tackle. You shoot a guy off, take a tackle.
Shoulder tackle.
Yes, sir. Then it went tackle, drop down, hip toss. For some reason, that was just a sequence that was easy. It was smooth. The guys were coming off the ropes. His momentum allowed you to hip toss him and take him over. You used his momentum against him. Then it went to tackle, drop down, reverse the hip toss. Okay, the business was evolving now. Then it went to tackle, drop down, reverse the hip toss, reverse it again. And if you remember this one from watching matches, a guy would do that second reversal and the guy would go out over the top from the hip toss. Now we're getting into the high flying stuff for that era. That was a big bump for those days. That would be a sequence. There's an unwritten rule in the business that if a guy snatches an arm or snatches a hold, say he grabs a headlock or he dips around behind you and grabs a waist lock, if he just sits there for over a couple of seconds without taking you down or advancing his position, he's wanting you to reverse it.
Yeah.
So you reverse it.
Yeah.
And if he reverses it again and he sits there for a couple of seconds, reverse it again.
I see.
You're kind of learning by osmosis, because if a guy zips in behind you and waist locks you and he's got you, he's going to probably take you up, take you down, ride you a little bit, do a little bit of amateur stuff. If he grabs a headlock, he turns it into a hammer lock. If he just sits there, he just want you to reverse it.
I see.
A lot of it's common sense, but you got to have that move set and knowing how to work those holes. You got to have that on your tool belt, or doesn't matter that he wants something. If you don't know what to do, you don't know what to do.
is it true? And this could just be one particular performer who told me this before, that if you're in one of those series of moves and the person sort of gives you a little squeeze, that means reverse it.
It's called the office.
Okay.
It's giving me the office on the wrist, a little squeeze. Now, that also will mean if you grab a headlock and you're squeezing a guy's head, really squeezing a guy's head.
Oh, it means ease up, motherfucker.
Yeah. Lighten up. It has several meanings. Could mean reverse this, lighten up. If you get potated, now that's not like having a hold too tight. Anybody can get potated. You let it go. It's like it never existed.
Yeah.
But if in that same proximity of time pretty quickly again, if you get potated again, now you have to
fire back.
Well, you got to assess in your mind, is he pickling me because he's not very good?
Right.
Is this just he's not good and he's hit you hard? Or did I do something to set this off? And if you know for sure you didn't, then you go ahead and give one right back. And there's no discussion. There's no conversation about it. You just know that, hey, once you get me, that can be an accident.
Yes.
Second time, if you're not very good, then you shouldn't be in here, and you just pickle me. So you should be able to take as much as you give.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna feed you one back. And hey, nobody gets mad. It's not one of those issues, because the worst thing can happen, and it doesn't happen very often, thank God, is a real fight goes down in the ring.
Yeah.
It's not a pretty sight.
No, it's not what people want to see either.
Yeah.
A real fight's not pretty. It's not spectacular.
And the audience don't understand it because it just went from ballet to rugby.
Yeah.
Because notoriously it's like bang, bang, somebody gets hit back, or somebody just gets hit and they go down and they double leg a guy and they're just stuck there. Now the referee's got to get them, separated. It's not a good thing for anybody. So thank God that doesn't happen very often.
So there you go. We've learned what the quote unquote office is. He's given me the office, but I also think it's important to break down sort of the receipt concept. After you take that potato, it could be viewed as either giving the receipt. I mean, could either be viewed as, hey, I'm standing up for myself because I feel like you're abusing me and I'm not going to let you walk all over me and take advantage of me. Or B, it could be, hey, dude, you don't know this, but you're hurting me, so I'm going to hurt you back, so ease up. But either way, we're going to address it right then. There's another phrase that we've heard sometimes as fans that maybe doesn't make any sense. I know I've had questions about it in my DMs. What does the phrase "get it again" mean?
If you got a headlock, I'll just say tackle, get it again. I want you to get the head after you hit me with the tackle. Let me feed up and get the same hold you had again.
Yep.
Go back to what we had.
So a reset, if you will.
If I take your arm, you reverse my arm, I flip over, kick you off as I'm feeding up, and we're turning into each other. If I just go, get it again, you grab my wrist and get the arm again, because that's what we started with.
Let's talk about the very next day after those TV tapings. It's the 25th of November, 1982. Now, I bring special attention to this show because this is the Superdome extravaganza. It's Thanksgiving night in New Orleans, and we're in the Superdome in front of 15,000 fans. The first match on the card that night is Tim Horner beating Mike Bond. The second match is Mike Sharp beating Marty Lunde. And this has got to be a footnote in your career for real. Biggest crowd you ever wrestled in front of?
Oh, God, yes, for sure.
What do you remember about going into the Superdome? And by the way, it's Thanksgiving. You're not home with grandma. You're in New Orleans, long way from Rome, Georgia, in a Superdome where you've probably seen football and a ton of other stuff for years and years on TV. And now here you are in this massive arena that, these days when they run shows there, they ride around backstage in golf carts. It's so damn big. What do you remember about this day?
Well, I'm going to tell you a horror story about after the show in just a minute, and it'll be a horror show for guys like me and you. So I'll get there in a second. This show was like my first show, even remotely. I mean, when you see the Superdome from the inside for the first time, it's take your breath.
Yeah.
Really would. It's the first time I met Tully Blanchard, and the only time I was in the building with Gino Hernandez.
Huh.
They had came over from San Antonio. You know, Bill had put, you know, like this huge card together, and you know, I just met Tully just for again. I'm just an underneath guy. It was just, hello, sir. How are you? He just said, fine. How are you? And it just kind of passed. There was no. I don't even know that there was a handshake. And Gino was probably off in a broom closet somewhere. Who knows?
Let me time out right there. Tim Horner over Mike Bond, Mike Sharp over Marty Lunde. The third match is Princess Victoria over Leilani Kai. The fourth match is Bob Roop over King Cobra. The fifth match is Mil Mascaras teaming with Chavo Guerrero to take on Tully Blanchard and Gino Hernandez. The sixth match is Mr. Wrestling number 2, who's going to beat Mr. Olympia. The seventh match is DiBiase and Matt Bourne, your Mid-South Tag Champs, and they're going to beat Terry Gordy and Buddy Roberts, the Freebirds. The eighth match is Tony Atlas beating the Mid-South Louisiana champ Jim Duggan by countout. And your main event, wouldn't you know it, it's Stagger Lee beating Ted DiBiase to win the Mid-South North American title. So they were building to this big return, and that's the main event. It draws 15,000 fans. I just wanted to give everybody the full card and run through those names so you could hear them again. And now I'm going to tag you back in. My apologies for cutting you off.
No, cut me off anytime you want. That's a pretty good card.
That's a great card.
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, they had it curtained off to where you didn't have a bunch of empty seats. I mean, they had it that 15,000 people looked probably like 30. And they were loud, and it was incredible. It was just one of those shows that from start to finish, even though they knew the first couple of matches that you weren't a star, they still were there for the big show. They were excited, and the audience were some of the featured stars of the night because, man, when a building like that, the acoustics, when it bangs off that ceiling, it's so loud and it's so deafening, and it's just something you've never experienced before. And it was incredible. And it was probably my biggest payoff there. I want to say maybe $500.
Well,
which was a lot of money to me because that's usually what I made a week.
Right.
But this was one of those special shows and special deals. If Bill turned in 15,000 people, there were probably 22. And Bill's socks got a lot fatter as the night went on, probably stuffing those 20s and 50s in there. I got to figure. So let me double back to just a funny story. Now, this is Thanksgiving.
Right.
There was no catering at the building.
Of course not. It's Bill Watts.
You certainly couldn't sit there. I mean, we had to be at that show a lot earlier, I'm sure. And we drove down from Baton Rouge. Well, Tim and I had become friends with just a civilian. He's a guy that you know lived in Baton Rouge, and he met Tim first, and Tim introduced him to me. And I can't remember the kid's name, but he was one of those. He was like Ernest T. Bass. It's the only way I can describe it. He would just show up at your apartment, and he didn't do it. This is just to give you a little background on him. He didn't do it maliciously, but he would just get to your house, walk up, open the door, and just walk in. Now, I didn't know this guy. Tim barely knew him, but knew him a little bit. To me, I thought that was, you know, hey, you knock on somebody's door, even your family's door when you're at their house. You don't just bust in. So anyway, Tim and I had started to settle in as roommates and really got to know each other. He's a country boy and, you know, country cooking. He likes all that. And so we go, you know, we're going to be out of there early. We're going to be done. I got a treat for us. I went to the grocery store and I bought an 8-pound chuck roast. You're going to appreciate this. I got the carrots, got the whole onions, got the potatoes, put it all in there, put it in the pot on low, and let it start to cook. Just as we were leaving to drive down. And now this is going to slow cook, man. It's going to be falling apart. It's going to make its own gravy. I had some rolls already set out and buttered, sitting in the microwave. Had some sewer peas. This is shaping up to be a pretty good Thanksgiving dinner when we get back.
Sure.
So we actually rode down there, which was a no-no to do, but we were getting there so early, there weren't going to be any fans there or anything. So we didn't tell anybody. We kind of snuck. And one of the only times we rode together, we rode down. It was Thanksgiving. What the hell? You're kind of homesick and you're missing, your family a little bit. And so we ride down the man and we are talking about, can't wait to get home, man. That meal is going to be unbelievable. So we have our matches. We get in the car. And let's just say everybody in those days took a little puff of Bacalolo.
Sure.
Well, I was never a big fan of that because it made me A, sleepy, B, hungry. But we bummed a doobie from one of the guys. And for this special occasion, it's only 80 miles back. Tim's driving. We're in his Jetta. And we're talking about this meal. I went, hey, man, I'm going to put some honey butter on those rolls. This stuff is going to make its own gravy. So we're set there, got those sewer peas, whatever else. I think we might have bought a pecan pie too or something. So, I mean, the anticipation, you would have thought we were like going to Six Flags over Georgia at 8 years old for the first time or something. We're like two little kids. So we pull up and I see this kid, his truck is sitting there. And I went, I wish I could remember his name. Have you talked to him today? No, I haven't. So we open the door and we start in the door. And from our apartment, from the front door, you could look all the way to the kitchen.
Right.
Well, he has got a serving spoon. He has cut up that 8-pound roast and he is dipping his head down in there like an oil cricket. You know what an oil cricket is, right?
No.
It is one of those machines that you see all over Texas and Louisiana to extract oil out of the ground.
Got it. Okay.
This movement.
Yes.
That's all I can see. And his head is going in and out of our roast. And man, I screamed. Ted was his name. Ted. And I'm thinking, oh God, surely he didn't. We get over there. He has come over there and got high as a kite and ate our 8-pound roast.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. There was maybe enough roast left to make one roast biscuit. If you're going to make a biscuit, that's it. He ate 8 pounds of beef. Well, I guess I can explain to you how mad I got. I grabbed him by the hair and we started towards the door. And I don't think I said a word to him. I threw him through the front door and knocked the screen door off the hinges. He took a bump. Tim's going, Marty, stop. You don't understand, man. He ate the roast. It's all gone. He ate it all. Now Tim goes over. He looks in the pot. Now we're stoned. We're starving. Yeah. It's all gone. He got the nickname that day, Oil Cricket. That's what we called him from that point on. It took about 2 weeks to forgive this guy. And he's the kind of guy that would run errands for you. If you needed a ride to a town that was close, he would drive you there and wait on you and drive you back. He was a good guy, but his error in judgment that day is colossal.
Yeah. He ate your damn food, your Thanksgiving.
All of it. We ended up going to McDonald's for Thanksgiving. Talking about a downer.
Yeah.
No offense, McDonald's, but it ain't one of my roasts.
Well, yeah, no kidding. I got another question. What the hell is a sewer pea?
Green peas. The little bitty English peas.
I thought that was like a sweet pea. Why is it a sewer pea?
Because that's what my granny called it, and that's what you're going to call it going forward.
I'm not arguing that. I'm just
sewer
wondering.
Peas.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
when they're the little ones, they're firmer, little green peas. Now they soup them up today. You can get the little onions and the mushrooms in there too. Good stuff.
Let's talk about December. You're going to get December started. Chavo Guerrero is going to beat you on TV on December 8th. Stagger Lee is going to beat you the same day, same set of TV tapings. You work the Sam Houston Coliseum in Houston, Texas for Houston Wrestling with Tiger Conway Jr. on the 10th of December in 1982. Tell me about working the Sam Houston Coliseum. What did you think of Houston, the town? And what can you tell us about Tiger Conway Jr.? We get a lot of questions about him when we're talking about other territories, but you worked him way back here in 82.
Well, do you see a pattern forming here about my one-loss record?
We're not winning a lot of matches.
Oh, for everything. And you know what? I'm loving every minute of it. Well, it was 275 miles, which is what you remember, old timers from my era. When you say, okay, what do you remember about a town? You remember, where did I live? How far did it take? Did I have to drive to get there? And it was 275 each way. But it was one of those towns that was Paul Bosch was still part owner of it. Bill Watts was part owner of it, I think. For sure Bill was, but you would go over there and I think Paul Bosch made the payoffs because you got a nice payoff for that. I mean, I never heard figures. You may have the numbers there of what kind of house it was, but it was a good house. Let me put it to you that way. And,
he had a reputation for being one of the best payoff guys in wrestling, though, right? He was more than fair with the guys.
That's where I was going. I want to say I might have got 300.
Wow.
On that show. So it had to be a pretty good house. But I mean, if you got 5 for the Superdome, which was like Bill Watts WrestleMania at that time. Sure. That wasn't so bad. And you picked up good payoffs like that occasionally. Occasionally Little Rock would give you those kind of, payoffs, but some of the bigger towns, Tulsa and Oak City, but Houston, I just remember because you would just drive there, get there hour and a half before the show started, work, get in the car and drive back. So the only thing I can remember, because I never went out or anything in Houston, was just how majestic the skyline was.
Yeah. Drive
it in. And in those days, you spent so much time in your car, that would be like a highlight. Oh man, look how gorgeous that skyline is and stuff. So it was a big city. I know the Hispanic stars were over like Rover.
Oh yeah.
Huge. And that's really all I remember about that. It was a first or second match. Tiger Conway, I know, was over with Tully's organization when his dad had San Antonio. I remember Tully talking about Tiger Conway Jr. was over when he worked for us. So he had gotten over in that area, I guess. And they certainly knew who he was when he wrestled for Bill Watts.
Let's talk about the few more matches here in December, and then we'll wrap this one up. But I know we want to tell a story in particular about how you're moving around here. On the 17th, Tim Horner is going to beat you back in Shreveport at a live event. And then we'll wrap up the month of December and I guess the year 1982 on the 29th with another show in Shreveport, not a televised event, but you're working with Dick Murdock. My goodness.
He was as good as he wanted to be that night. A lot of times Dick would go out later in his career and just entertain himself.
Do Three Stooges bits, really?
Yes. No other way to say it. If you were a young guy and you were just following along, it was fine because he was getting reactions on it because he was over. Captain Redneck, Dick Murdock. But as you developed in the business and you got a little better and your positioning got better and, you got to be a more seasoned guy and you would wrestle Dick 3 or 4 years later. And, on those nights that you were at a spot show or just some little show that was out of the way or something, and he was in one of those moods, when he wanted to pull that stuff, then it didn't seem quite as enjoyable because you're trying to get legitimate heat and you're trying to get over and you're trying to make money and you're trying to draw money. And I love Dick Murdock. He was one of those guys that if you wanted to make a trip and have a case of beer ice down, there was nobody better. But he just, it was one of those things that when he wanted to work serious, when he was partners with Slater many, many years after that, if you remember, for WCW, when those guys, when they were serious, man, they would go in and tear it up. Dickie was one of those guys that just, you didn't know what the mood was. But hey, nothing but respect for the guy.
So 2 follow-up questions from what we talked about when we discussed last week's episode that we've nicknamed Pensacola with Pee Wee. Is Pee Wee still with you? Is he still making all these towns or has he gone back home now?
No, actually, Pee Wee had went back out with me. He's staying with Tim. And right along the time that I was about, let's just say 3 months in, 2 months left to go, Junkyard Dog, who got to know Pee Wee from being at the shows with me, actually hired him as his assistant.
Wow. /
driver, because I can't explain to you how long the trips were. 2,500, 3,000 miles was the norm. And JYD was, on the main event every night. He was having to travel those roads by himself. So I think he was paying Pee Wee something like $150 a week. If there was a trip that called for a stayover, Dog would pick up his hotel room, and basically he was just on call. JYD had a Mercedes. Pee Wee was driving a Mercedes around. Had $150. He had no bills because he stayed with us for nothing. He had a pretty sweet, and he stayed with Dog for some time after I left. He stayed out there, and he had forged a spot for himself.
So if you're not riding with Pee Wee, who are you riding with?
Any of the other heels, until we got to the point where I'm about 2 months out, 6 weeks maybe from finishing up. And I got an invite from a unexplained source to ride with him.
We're going to leave that as a tease for next week, a 2-week tease.
Floored me. Floored me. But I was riding, with whoever. The main thing was in those days, you would figure out, okay, when are we on? You're on first, I'm on second. Hell yeah, man, let's get out of there. You would pick guys to ride with. And if it was one of those situations you didn't get along with guys or whatever, and you paid transportation, 4 cents a mile, if you rode with another guy in his car. So there was all kind of little rules, and you paid that trans no matter what. When the trip was over, cash money right there to the guy. Because inadvertently, what I figured out is everybody blew their engines up, had so many pop tires from traveling on those rotten roads. it was really a bad situation. And everybody's cars, pretty much, you tore up your vehicle working for Bill.
I want to mention too, I think you told me off air once that you didn't just have a spare tire when you worked for Bill Watts. You had two.
Yep. Well, those roads haven't, and I've been out there over the years and over the decades, they still haven't been paved. Some of those back roads, and you would have sometimes 200 miles of back roads.
Right.
And they hadn't been paved. And I can't tell you, the potholes, you come around a corner, you never even saw it, because the roads, some of them, it would be a 2-lane road, but there were no lines. I mean, there wasn't a center line and all that stuff. Louisiana is a different place. It's like they make their own rules out there. It's a different country. So I saw that, pretty early on, like the first week. I pulled up, like I think I was parking, and I pulled in, and a couple of guys pulled in beside me in 2 different cars. And I noticed, when they opened their trunk, some of them had an extra spare tire. And I just asked us, why has everybody got 2 spare tires? They went, you'll find out. And hey, when you get between those little towns late at night, when you're making trips, there's no mechanics. You're lucky if you can find a convenience store on some of those little towns on those back roads. So if you pop a tire and you don't have, or you pop 2 tires, let's just say, you don't have a spare, you're screwed. So sometimes it never happened to me. I never had a flat tire, knock on wood, out there, but I was set in case I did.
Let's run through some of the towns that you're making. Shreveport, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Lake Charles, Louisiana, Alexandria, Louisiana, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Little Rock, Arkansas, New Orleans, Louisiana, Houston, Texas. You're all over the place, man. And let's briefly give everybody a peek of what's going to be happening in January of '83. You're going to have a ton of matches, including Bruno Sammartino Jr., Dick Murdock, Dr. Death, Steve Williams, Mike Sharp, Kelly Kaniski, a tag team effort where Tony Torres and Buddy Landell are on the other side. Art Cruz is going to be opposing you as you team with Tom Ernesto Jr., a ton of matches, of course, with your old pal Tim Horner, and on and on. And we're going to keep the story going here next week, but we're also going to reveal, as you start to wind things down, and you're going to be moving back over to Georgia Championship Wrestling, the person who's been driving you around, that's your now new traveling buddy, he doesn't have a beat to shit car. He's a top guy. So he's got a nice car, and he's drawing real money, and he's going to let you sit under his learning tree. And, well, every man has his price, right?
Yes, sir. Well said.
We'll find out more next week right here on ARN. We hope you're enjoying what we're doing. I think we're having a blast. This is probably the most fun you've had just telling stories. I know that we've had some peeks into some Crockett stuff here and there, but by and large, we spent a lot of our show so far, you and I, talking about the behind the scenes machinations of WWE from 10 years ago and 5 years ago. But this is a horse of another color, man. You're passionate about telling your sort of origin story, and it comes through. I appreciate you being so candid with us.
Well, it's easy, Conrad, when you're having fun. It's like, it's kind of like when you can't make a mistake when you tell the truth.
Right.
And you don't have to worry about telling the truth and having the same story every time, because the truth is easy. It's when you start lying that you can't remember the lies.
Right.
And I made myself a promise before I actually got, while I was still during the years with WWE, and I was doing the producer job and all that. And I made myself a promise that if, when I got out of the business, whenever it was through with me and nobody wanted to use me anymore, we all have a shelf life. That's just part of the business. That I would never become one of those bitter guys that just saw the negative, and if there wasn't anything negative, I would project something negative onto it. I promised myself I would never be one of those guys. But I got to be honest with you, thanks to the fans, I started to figure out that I was being negative. because that was my feelings of my job description. I wasn't having fun. I wasn't enjoying the business anymore. So, every week it started to be some of those negative connotations and I don't want to be that way. I want to be that guy that this is all I've ever wanted to do since I was 8. I'm having a blast. It's the greatest way to make a living on earth. A wonderful business. I love it, and I'm back loving it now. And being able to just explain to people what the lifestyle was and some of the things that you might not know and some of the quirkiness of the business that is appealing to our audience, and they want to hear that stuff. And I just want to stay positive going forward. So this has been a blessing. Thanks for rolling with me on this. I think you agree it's been fun.
It's been super fun, and we're going to keep the fun going next week. We're going to talk about you finishing up with Bill Watts. We'll cover January, February, and March of '83. And then, of course, after that, man, we really start cooking with gas. Destruction Incorporated becomes a thing over in Georgia Championship Wrestling. You'll hit a couple of different spot shows for Houston Wrestling. And then we're going to start talking a little bit more about Southeastern Championship Wrestling. And somewhere in here, we're probably going to have a guest or two to sort of tell the other side of the story. This is going to be fun, dude. I'm looking forward to a big summer here with you.
Ditto. It's going to be great.
If you have a question for us, don't forget, you can always participate. Just cruise on over and find us on Twitter. It's at the ARN Show. When we finish up with his Watts run, we will do a Q&A, and I imagine we'll have lots more questions about Bill Watts at that time. But we felt like, rather than break up the flow of the story, let's keep going with the story. As he starts to change territories, we'll jump in and do a Q&A and probably give you an opportunity to ask a bunch of questions about not only the promoter, Mr. Bill Watts, but the territory, the different cities, and of course the performers and the matches that happen there. So we'll finish up with all things Bill Watts next week, and then we'll do a Q&A, and we'll be back for more Georgia Championship Wrestling. This is fun, man. Tell everybody about the reset button. It's ARN. It's Saturday. It's 6:05. We'll see you next week right here on ARN.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.